My name is DenHartog. I am the president of Telecom. I always hesitate to trot that title out there like it really means something. What it means is that I've been working at Telecom for 20 years. I started as a firmware programmer. I answered an ad that was looking for assembly language programming because I could program an assembly language. That's an art that has long since kind of faded into the background of we still use it. We still use it. Yeah, well, there you go. But that's how I got started. Worked from there. I worked DPS Telecom is kind of a vertically integrated offering. So we offer the remotes as well as the head-end monitoring system. So I worked programming Pascal and C and C++, and then I navigated into the web development, and so we're active there. I've done just about everything at DPS Telecom, and a year and a half, 2 years ago, the then president of DPS Telecom, who'd been there since the beginning, decided he was going to retire. So I am now the president of DPS Telecom, but I am at heart, I'm an engineer, and DPS Telecom is a company of engineers. So I'm here really as an engineer talking to engineers. We're going to talk this morning about surviving the in-house solution stack hack. Technology is changing. Technology is certainly more accessible to the engineer or to the developing engineer. It's also, I think, more widely understood in today's market. But the accessibility and the, I'm going to call it the initial understanding of that technology does pose some significant risks, up to and including the possibility of ending your career or killing your career. The solution stack hack is essentially a collection of technologies that are available that you assemble to address a problem. The solution stack hack usually involves some degree of home brewed contribution. You code, you program, you write scripts, you're the one that understands it best. That is an in-house solution stack hack. They are an important aspect of company performance. These types of solutions have some significant value, but they typically have some significant risks, and it's not unusual to have this type of solution get into the deployment cycle, that is past the launch, and then end up failing. Not because the solution didn't work, not because it wasn't a viable or valuable contribution, just because it has some fundamental issues. And this is all centered again around a fundamental idea. How does a good idea, that is an idea that you have or your manager has or your team develops, how does that good idea end up being a nightmare? And it happens. It starts out cute, starts out productive, starts out with lots of value, and then before you're done, it becomes something that nobody ever imagined. Now, candidates for the in-house solution stack hack. So what do you do, or where do these things come from? We've identified kind of 4 main sources of ideas for in-house solution stack hacks. One is recurring problems. You know what these are. These are the problems that you find you or somebody in your team saying, we've done this before, or in a more frustrated moment, how many times are we going to do this? That becomes a candidate for saying, let's see if there's a way to get this automated. Let's see if there's a way to work around this. And workarounds and adaptation then become the next source. If you or your member of a team is always called on by some other department or by some other manager to well, this has happened again, we have this piece of equipment that's down again. What can you do for us? Repetitive tasks, automation, test tools, another source, and then finally, information sharing. There are times when you will be writing reports for the 60th time, and you'll say to yourself, wow, it would be a lot better if we could just share this information directly. And so you develop a script, exporting from one source and importing into another one. That becomes a type of solution stack hack. Typically, these solutions are targeted toward the biggest issues that your company is facing. They're usually developed, these hacks are usually developed by subject matter experts. That is, the people in your company that know this problem best, that understand this problem, that typically have experience dealing with this problem over and over and over. And that's why the solution stack hack has benefit. Typically, too, the solution that's developed is very specifically focused at the problem. In fact, we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the trick, obviously, is to lock in all of these benefits without falling down the rabbit hole, I would say, without exposing yourself and perhaps becoming victim to some of the risks. Who initiates the hunt? We talked earlier about the frustrated technician who's having to do this for the 60th time. I mean, we've all been there, we all have those kind of problems. That's one source. The manager often has a little bit higher perspective, or a little bit higher level perspective. He's identifying a pattern. Well, gosh, it seems like you were just doing that last week, he'll say. And we can sometimes, in our direct involvement in the problem, we sometimes don't see those patterns. But a manager can frequently help us identify, well, gosh, boy, it sure seems like that's the 10th time you've done that this month. Maybe we need to circle back around on that. And then finally, the user complaint. This is probably the most painful source of ideas for solution stack hacks. If you've got users or one of your clients that finally gets to the point where they're calling your customer support line and saying, how many doggone times am I going to deal with this issue? And that's the source of the thing. That's a painful source. Where is it developed? We talked earlier about it being a local solution, the subject matter expert being the one that's involved. That's typically the source for the work or the effort that's involved in the task, and it usually starts as an out-of-band involvement. I don't know how many times, maybe I should ask, how many of you have had experience with any kind of what do you call it, impromptu or a solution stack hack? How many have had opportunity to do it? Okay, well, we've all been involved in it, but in any case, usually starts a little bit out of band. We're doing this at the end of the day after we've done everything else we're supposed to do, and yet we know we've got this problem, and so we're kind of putting together this solution out of band. But the problem is it ends up slowly invading our space. It becomes a larger part of our regular schedule, and then we start squeezing our regular tasks to make more room for developing this solution. So while it starts out of band, it can quickly become invasive. It is, however, it does benefit from the idea that it is actively being used. Typically, these solutions go very quickly into some type of direct application, and because of that, we're using them daily or frequently, and so it has that benefit of iterative development. We refine it. We say to ourselves, "Oh, shoot, it would be better if we could do this," and so it has that benefit. And then we also, for those of us who have done it, understand that there are a lot of times where we'll launch something like this and we'll get 80% of the way into it, and we'll just say to ourselves, well, shoot, that's just not going to work. That's not as slick as I thought it was going to be. That's not the solution that I imagined. And so we shelved that, and perhaps in that process, we've identified a little bit different direction that we can move, and so we launched the next project that we're going to work on. So many of these projects never actually get out the gate, but that is the process of developing these solutions. Because it starts very locally, it's typically us, we're right there in the middle of the tech. We're developing this at one site. We understand the problems at that site. If the solution that we do develop ends up having some value, it can kind of organically grow to our region. That is the people that we have direct contact with in the course of our work. We'll be talking about the solution that we developed, and they'll say, "Oh gosh, that sounds great. Can you let me have one, or can you help me develop that, or can you send me that script, or whatever it is." It's that type of organic sharing that gives it a little bit broader impact horizon. If the solution does continue to gain momentum, then it becomes a large region type of deployment, and then it can even grow to be company-wide. But those types of larger impact horizons introduce a whole bunch of issues that we'll talk about here as we go forward. So, why would you be leery? I talked earlier about the idea that it's possible in some cases that these types of contributions can end up being career killers, and how does that happen? These products can be difficult to scale. That is, difficult to grow this beyond our little work area crafted solution. They're difficult sometimes to maintain purchase access. You'll have components of this solution. Again, remember, it's multiple pieces that you kind of stack together into some type of craftsman type of solution. It's difficult to maintain those channels, to make sure that each one of those components is going to be available long term, going forward. Sometimes, as we craft it, because it makes so doggone much sense to us, and we're directly involved in development, we don't leave enough of a trail for the other people that use it. So your colleague that says, gee, that sounds good, why don't you give me a copy, why don't you send me that script? He gets it, but it's not quite as intuitive as we thought. It's always intuitive to the developer, right? I mean, we're the ones that did it. Everything that's about that interface makes all the sense in the world to us, but the next person who sees it says, I don't understand that at all. So those are challenges that are often addressed in documentation. And then we talked earlier about the idea that it becomes invasive. Well, there's nobody more key than you. And sometimes, depending on how the solution is launched and how it grows, it can quickly absorb a larger and larger portion of your time. And so you end up, instead of being able to grow your career, end up in a support role for this particular solution stack hack. So that's a major risk. That obviously can increase your stress. And then the final thing that we did mention on this particular slide is the cleanup cost, the sudden cleanup cost. Man, you'll get the solution developed, it'll work, it's generating value for you, you send it to a colleague who maybe works in a couple, 3 more locations, and then it finally gets a little momentum and somebody says, why don't we deploy this across the region? And you'll get 20 out there or 30 out there, and then finally you'll have a problem. And at that point, you've got a 30-unit deployment, and you have something that's just fundamentally wrong or a weakness or vulnerability, and you'll have a 30-unit deployment across a wide geographic region that you're responsible for fixing. That can be a significant problem, and anybody who's been involved in a product launch understands what that looks like. Statistically speaking, it's sobering. All of these stats would suggest that a significant number of IT projects like this fail. 68%, 60 to 80, 65 to 80, 50%. Statistically, it's significant. It's not uncommon for these type of projects, no matter what their source is, no matter how well it's crafted, for these type of projects to end up kind of crashing and burning, and that's something that we want to avoid. And then we talked about the problems of scale. If the solution does work, it's deployed at a single site, you can handle everything that's involved in it, you can access it, it's at your office or perhaps just down the street around the corner, it's local to you, you can take care of everything that's involved. But if it gets deployed much beyond your office, travel becomes an issue, qualified technicians at those other sites become an issue, whether or not they understand your solution, whether or not they understand your documentation, even if you have developed documentation. Sometimes there could be a lot of head scratching, and the calls end up coming back to your desk. You'll be the one that ends up involved, and that begins to impact your schedule and your availability for other higher value projects. Support can become a full-time job in some cases, if you got, especially if it's a problem or if there is a problem. Your setup guide begins to have more detail, and every person who reads it will seem to come back to you with a suggestion about, well, why didn't you tell us that? Or, you know, you really need to have a picture of this, or you really, or they'll come back with design suggestions, you know, well into the initial deployment. You know, well, gee, it really should do this, or, well, if you want it deployed in our area, it really needs to look like this. And so that can happen too, and that happens as the deployment spreads. And then you have problems like the components that you've selected. You end up with the challenge of coordinating the acquisition, the assembly, and the deployment of your solution. And if it does involve multiple pieces, that becomes logistically challenging. You're working with your purchasing department, it seems like you're always finding out that, well, this component has an extended lead time this month, you know, for whatever reason. And that's not at all uncommon in situations where your project perhaps isn't a big enough solution to really carry a lot of weight in the channel. So the requisition that you turned in for the next region of deployment that involved 10 units of this, well, 10 units. You know, so your purchasing agent is calling their channel contact and they're saying they want 10 units. Well, you've got somebody out there that wants 500. So your little 10 unit order gets pushed aside. Logistics become a real challenge in these situations. So, how do you lock in the games and protect yourself? How do you prevent becoming like Mr. Houdini here, with your project becoming a veritable network of padlocks and chains? Documentation is first. So document your plan. Make sure that you take the time to write down what your goals are. If you launch too quickly, if you get too quickly involved in development, sometimes you lose sight of it. You just can't remember, what was it that I was trying to solve here? And that becomes especially true as you get other people involved, because everybody's going to have their own idea about what they want or what the solution needs. You need to take the time to write down, what are my goals, what are my thoughts, how did I get here, so that if you get other people involved, you still keep your project on track. Build a demonstration prototype. We were looking on the way over here, we had a 2.5-hour plane delay in San Francisco. We were sitting at the San Francisco airport, we were looking at early prototypes of the iPod. We found a prototype, one of the prototypes, that was, as far as we could tell, it was a cardboard box. Somebody had literally just taken a cardboard box and crafted it into a kind of a large iPod, and they had written on this box the design goals. You know, it needed to have this much storage space, and it needed to have a 1/8-inch stereo connector, and they had just spec'd it. It was spec'd on a little cardboard box that they had drawn what looked like the initial interface for an iPod. Fascinating, but it is a valuable tool, this kind of demonstration prototype. And then trot that demonstration prototype around. If you do get other people involved, let them see what you're thinking. Because if you try and describe it, if you don't have that prototype, you're going to be forced to try and in words articulate your vision. And that is a challenge. Anybody who's ever been involved in a design meeting that involves nothing but verbal, presentation, oh my goodness, they can just go on and on, because you're describing something that in your mind is crystal clear. It's kind of like, how in the world can you not understand what my vision is? And the other person has some completely different picture in his mind or her mind, and so it's important to kind of retain these prototypes, make sure that becomes the driver for those kind of discussions. And then don't get stuck. Implement the features that you kind of agree on as you get other people involved. Keep the project moving. If you do have a feature that becomes problematic, and it always happens, there's something that man, this is a little bit more awkward than I anticipated, try and get that to a delivery point, get that to something that is functional, or at least semi-functional, and move on to get those other features implemented. We can go back and we can polish that one, we can refine it, we can adjust it. We may even agree in a subsequent discussion that feature really wasn't important, And because it's awkward, we can shelve that and still have a good solution. So don't get stuck. And I don't know what you guys, maybe your guys are completely different, but as an engineer, man, sometimes it's like we're like bulldogs, man. You get on an issue and you're gonna work till midnight to get that issue resolved. But in this type of environment where you're developing an in-house solution stack hack, the feature might not be that critical. So don't allow yourself to get stuck. And then finally, when you do at each delivery, and the concept of incremental delivery is important, everybody. Don't fall into the trap of thinking, I'm going to have this huge development process, and then I'm going to present. Keep your deliveries incremental. Develop a little bit, get it fully functional, demo it. Develop the next step, demo it. Develop the next step, demo it. Make those deliveries incremental and short time frames so that you can get people's input, you can get feedback, you can allow that to change the direction of your development. Your product will be better for it. If you spend invest a huge amount of time in developing something and then present it, you're overly committed. You've got a huge amount in it, and you're more reluctant to accept suggestions that it be changed. You're more reluctant to receive that feedback, and your product will suffer, or your solution will suffer because of it. So keep your deliveries incremental. Keep it well documented. Make sure as you're working, especially as you're working with these multiple components, each one of those components has setup and configuration. Make sure all that gets documented. If you're going to think in terms of making this anything more than what you personally support, you're going to need other people to be able to navigate those same screens. You're going to need other people to be able to intelligently, set those configuration parameters and so forth. So make sure all of those get documented, and especially the ones that are defaults. If you get other people involved in this kind of solution, they will play with those other screens. They're engineers like you. They're curious. They'll wonder what that is. They'll ask, and off they'll go down that other path. And pretty soon, your default screen that was a critical part of the functionality of your solution will have been tweaked by somebody who thought, well, gee, that looks like kind of interesting. I'll turn that option on. And pretty soon the solution doesn't work. People are calling you, and you don't have that default screen documented. So it's important to get those screens documented too. And then finally, as you're going through this process, and especially as you're relating to other people, document the questions and the answers. They're an important source of direction. They're an important record of how you got, where you ended up. It's part of the audit trail for an accounting term. But keep those questions and answers documented. We have at DPS Telecom, at least, we have the bus test. Everybody know what the bus test is? Anybody else have a bus test? If you walk out the door and are hit by a bus, will your project survive? And that's the bus test. It's important from an engineer's standpoint, because if you're the only one that knows what's involved in this project, there's a perception, there's a feeling even in each of us, man, that makes me important. I'm critical to this operation. There's no question that you're critical, but from anybody else's perspective, you're a huge vulnerability. You're a walking target. If you're the only one that knows how this works, that's a solution that basically nobody else can ever use, because they know that you're the only one that's going to be able to make this work. Don't become a sole source of knowledge. Make sure your knowledge gets captured. For anybody who walks in any kind of team leadership role, be alert to that. There's a temptation as a team leader to identify people on your team that are these kinds of critical assets. No question they're valuable. Absolutely you want to support them, you want to develop them, you want to release them to do what they're best at. But don't let them become that same type of vulnerability for you. It'll weaken your team ultimately, and it could doom your project. Nobody obviously ever anticipates getting hit by a bus, right? but it does happen. I left the office, I don't know, 6 years ago. I got a block down the street, and I had a taco truck pull out right in front of me, completely blind. It smashed right into the side of that taco truck. Fortunately, obviously, wasn't any kind of permanent problem. But those kind of accidents happen. So don't let that become a vulnerability for your project. And then, obviously you get this all designed, you get it pretty well documented, you've got a good team put together. You're going to scale this solution for rollout. You maximize the value. You're going to begin to deal with how to build the project. You have to deal with field trials. These are all important things to deal with. And there are essentially 4 ways. This show is actually full of companies, quality companies like Phoenix, I think, is here. We have a Git Wireless company. We've got an Optimal Solutions company. We've got a whole host of companies at the show that are designed to provide help in developing these kinds of solutions. Take advantage of those. That's what they're there for, and they do give you a degree of protection. You can also pay non-recurring engineering fees to have off-the-shelf product customized for your solution. That's another option. And then finally, you can work with companies, an engineering manufacturing partner that specializes in developing perfect fit. That's kind of our niche. That's how we position ourselves. We're a vertically designed engineering house. We'll see more about that later. But no matter what option you decide to use, these are the options these are the things that you need to consider. You need to brainstorm. You need to involve all of your shareholders in this deployment idea. This is what we're thinking about in terms of scaling this thing. Is everybody on board, and so forth? All of those types of discussions have to take place. You need to consider the packaging of your solution. Understand logistics, right? We talked about that earlier. Well, how are we going to package this? How is it going to be shipped? What kind of box are they going to have? What kind of documentation will they need to install it? Those kinds of things all have to be addressed. You're going to plan your field trials because you're getting involved, you're getting closer to deployment. I've got this solution, it's getting close to being done, we're all feeling good about it. We need to begin thinking about field trials. What does that look like? We need to plan phased rollouts. Those are challenges that we need to address. And then finally, we do need to create a support plan. If there are problems with this, or as we deploy this, who's going to take the calls? Have those discussions up front. If you don't have those discussions, you're going to be the one that takes the calls. That's how it works. So make sure you ask that question. Who's going to take calls? How is this going to be supported? Do we need to hire additional level 1 support, techs, whatever? Have those discussions before you get into deployment. It's too easy for you otherwise to become the one that handles all of it. We do suggest products like Bitbucket. It's a documentation option. It's a vehicle for collecting the documentation that you're developing. There's 1,000 vehicles that are available. Google Docs can be used if that's a resource that's available to you. But take advantage of vehicles that make it easy for other people to access your documentation. Ultimately, that's the challenge. It's certainly good to put it all in a memory key. But ultimately, that memory key isn't very accessible to everybody else in your company that you're hoping is going to buy into your solution. So try and pick a vehicle that's more widely accessible. And then we talked about starting with a virtual prototype. That is an important part. If you can't craft it with paper, I can tell you we do a number of mechanical designs that are essentially cut out of paper. Just so that we know that it'll bend, we know that it'll interface correctly. We do it in paper. That's cheap and it's valuable. But if not, develop your skills. There's a number of programs like Inkscape. If you've got a lot of money, you can also purchase higher-end drawing packages. Try to capture your ideas in some type of photorealistic. Take some pictures, Photoshop it in there. Let people know what you're thinking. The more clear that representation can be, the better your discussions can be. So take advantage of those tools. And then we talked earlier about using that prototype to drive brainstorming. Trot it out there in every discussion you have. Make it part of, allow it
to control the discussion. Don't get involved in just wild, unconstrained brainstorming. I can tell you, the moment you open it that wide, the ideas you'll get will be so far out of the scope of possible implementation, you will never finish the project. Let your virtual prototype control your discussion. Keep it focused. Brainstorming, obviously, an important part, and we talked earlier about all the risks. Make sure the discussion about risk is always a part of your discussions. Don't allow those discussions to be so high in the sky. Man, this is going to be awesome, and you know that nobody is even thinking about the risks or the possible problems. Make sure that some portion of your brainstorming session is focused on what could go wrong. What could go wrong? Ask that question. Get people's input. Some people have excellent experience with things going wrong. I mean, we all do, obviously. Not everything is, in fact, much of our careers sometimes I feel like are spent dealing with things that have gone wrong. But each one of those represents a lesson, and make sure those get collected in the course of your brainstorming. And then resist the temptation to commoditize. You aren't developing, you don't need to develop a solution that you're going to sell millions of. You need to develop a solution that works for this problem, for this company. It could be that by the time you get that developed and you're generating good value for your company with this problem, it could be that has broader general appeal. But don't get sucked down that rabbit hole. Again, avoid it. You aren't trying to develop a million-unit seller. You're trying to solve a specific problem for your company today. Get that problem solved, get it solved well, and then worry about whether or not that has broader appeal. So resist that temptation. Field trials. Don't skip this step. It's critical. And don't also allow your group to pick easy field trials. It's a temptation, always a temptation, because you want your project to succeed, you want your solution to work. Don't let your team build an easy field trial. Try and make your field trials hard. Look for the outliers. Look for the edges. Look for the places where your solution would be the most difficult to deploy. Have that be your field trial. The harder your field trial, assuming of course that you get the solution working, the harder your field trial was, the easier your rollout will be. That's the relationship. So resist the temptation to pick or build easy field trials. And then be careful when you get beyond the field trial. So okay, we got it, we're online, we're going to begin deploying this. Make your first deployment limited. I don't care how careful you are. The solution that works in 1 or 2 or perhaps 3 places, you get that deployed in 30 places, still not a big footprint, but it's always surprising the number of new issues you discover in that first limited rollout. Keep it limited. You get to 100 on your first phase, and you'll end up with in some cases, you'll end up with a mess is what you'll end up with. Try and make that first phase something smaller than 100 or 200. Keep it constrained so that it still is a manageable first phase. Test phases, watch for problems, you got it. And then finally, tech support documents and services. You're going to need to understand, do we need inside or outside support services? You're going to need manuals, install guides, all of these things have to be developed. And remember that we talked in terms of those questions and answers, capturing those become good sources for online support documents. So, availability of your parts. We talked about the challenges of maintaining logistics. You're going to have a solution, it's going to have multiple components. You're going to have to make sure that each one of those components is going to be available long term. You're going to have to understand what that channel needs to look like, and you're going to need to give that direction to your purchasing department. You're going to need to help people on your team and other people who are adopting this solution understand what that looks like. Yes, you can order it, you'll be able to tell them, but with confidence you'll tell them, and everything on here has a 2-week lead time, or everything on here is immediately available. Being able to give them that kind of guidance enables them to be more effective in deploying your solution. That makes your solution more successful. Otherwise, they'll order with the expectation that it's all immediately available, and they'll be frustrated before they even get your solution to their desk because everything had a 2-week lead time. So make sure that you're communicating that well. Make sure you understand it. And then finally, partner with good manufacturers. We started the presentation by talking about the general availability of technology. You can go on the internet, with a little bit of searching, find 200 sources for almost anything you want. Pick good manufacturers. Manufacturers that have history, manufacturers that perhaps can give you people to talk to. Understand your manufacturers. If they become part of your solution, you're going to need to be giving people good direction. Don't have them purchase components from manufacturers that have only been active for 2 months, or whatever. So make sure you understand those kind of problems and make sure you're picking good manufacturers. And the difference, obviously, between doing a project right and doing a project wrong is the difference between amateur and professional. Amateur engineers can throw stuff together, they become hack masters. And they'll end up with an easy bake oven. Professional engineers spend a little bit more time, they understand the problems and challenges, and they'll build wolf ranges. Same product, looks the same in some respects, but it's a completely different approach. Amateurs end up with a scooter to get the job done. Professionals end up with this is a Harley Davidson, but a Vulcan to get the job done. Vespa versus Vulcan can be the difference between a project that's kind of hacked together poorly and a project that's professionally completed. Garden hose versus a fire hose, another illustration, just the idea. Vertical integration is an important part of almost any solution. You can't end up isolating your solutions to just a particular layer. You've got to understand everything from the acquisition of the components to the deployment of the solution. And you can't enjoy the luxury of saying, well, we're just going to focus on this little piece right here, and I know that's quality. We're a vertically integrated manufacturer. We do the metal across the street. We do CAD design using SolidWorks. We design our enclosures. They're fabricated across the street with a water jet and press brakes and powder coat and silkscreen. We also design the PCBs at our house. We have an ECAD department where we build the circuits, we capture the schematic, we turn it into a board. And the only thing we don't do is manufacture the boards because of the chemicals involved. But they're brought back to our manufacturing facility. We populate it with the components. We load the firmware. We design the solutions that way. So we provide that kind of vertical integration at our facility. We're involved in a number of projects. This type of approach that I've described today, we've used successfully in any number of projects. We were involved in a valve control project in Arizona, where we were called on to develop a solution for intelligently routing pumped water into a river that's had a problem with the salinity. This approach can be successfully applied to any number of solutions, and it's especially successful because it does represent the idea that you're working with a vendor that's got a big stake in your project. So instead of doing it yourself, you've been successful in partnering with a vendor, and because they've got a big stake in the project, they can afford to support you better. We talked earlier about being the order of 10 against the order of 500. Well, don't allow your project to fall into the same slot. Yeah, I'm working with an engineering house, but they've got a $3 million project, and mine's a $30,000 prototype. I mean, it impacts their scheduling priorities. So make sure that you're working with a manufacturing or a design house that's well sized for your project. Don't let you become the mouse against the gorilla. And then the same type of relationship can help you look good. If you do make a good choice about the vendor partner or your design partner, that can have a big positive impact on your project. And so you can be the engineer that delivered the solution, but you didn't have to do all the work yourself. And yet, boy, look at it. That's a professionally designed solution. So that's the kind of advantage you get there. And we have also applied this to projects that involve global manufacturers. So this isn't just a small project type of approach. This can be a project approach that's successful with large vendors like your Samsungs or your HPs or your Nokias. There are solutions that can be, this can scale well, even to big projects. We developed a fiber interface for a multi-regional telecom. We developed an automated school security data. This was a solution that involved detecting gunshots and calling 911, the emergency services, without waiting for a direct involvement of on-site personnel. So it was another interesting project. So again, the solution we've described today and working with a good partner has been a successful approach for any number of applications, successful applications. Any questions?